Buckingham Palace has said King Charles spent a short period of time in hospital today after experiencing the temporary side effects.
Something happened to King Charles that forced the palace to act immediately, and the emergency decree they issued in response has given Catherine authority so unprecedented that royal watchers are struggling to find a historical comparison for it. What's going to happen to the British throne? The incident that changed everything. There are moments inside the British monarchy when the carefully maintained appearance of stability gives way to something that cannot be managed or contained or presented to the public in a form that softens its edges. This was one of those moments. King Charles III was rushed to the King, Edward VII Hospital, in London on the morning of the 9th of April, 2026. The circumstances surrounding his collapse were not immediately made public. The palace's initial statement, released at 11:20 in the morning, confirmed only that the king had been admitted for observation, following what was described as a sudden onset of fatigue and discomfort. The language was careful, deliberately vague in the way that palace statements about royal health always are, when the people drafting them know more than they are prepared to say. But the people paying close attention to the details surrounding that statement knew immediately that what they were being told was a significant understatement of what had actually happened. The first signal was the speed of the hospitalization itself. Charles had been at Buckingham Palace the previous evening for a scheduled private engagement. He had appeared, by the accounts of those present, to be managing, tired in the way that has become his baseline in recent months, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man whose body requires more effort to carry through a day than it once did, but present, engaged, functioning within the parameters of what his health situation had come to look like over the preceding year. What happened in the early hours of the 9th of April was different in kind from that baseline. Sources close to the royal household describe a rapid deterioration that began in the middle of the night. Members of the king's private medical team, who are resident at the palace, were called to his rooms at approximately 2:40 in the morning. The decision to transfer him to hospital was made within the hour. He arrived at the King Edward VII Hospital at 4:15 in the morning, in circumstances that those present described as genuinely urgent. This was not a precautionary admission. This was an emergency. The palace's communications team spent the hours between 4:15 and 11:20 managing the gap between that reality and the statement they were preparing to release. That gap is itself revealing. Nearly 7 hours elapsed between the king's arrival at hospital and the public announcement of his admission. 7 hours during which the institution was simultaneously managing a medical emergency and constructing the narrative framework within which that emergency would be presented to the world. What happened inside the palace during those 7 hours is where this story becomes truly significant, because the medical situation and the communications management were not the only things being handled in that window. Simultaneously, and with a speed that confirmed it had been prepared for in advance, a parallel process was underway. A process that had nothing to do with press statements or public messaging. A process that was entirely about the internal functioning of the monarchy and the question of who held authority within it in the event that the king was incapacitated. That process produced the emergency decree. To understand the decree and what it means, you first have to understand the constitutional framework within which it operates. The British monarchy has mechanisms for managing situations where a sovereign is temporarily unable to carry out their functions. These mechanisms have been used before. George VI used a version of them during the periods of serious illness that preceded his death in February of 1952. The late Queen activated elements of the same framework during the final weeks of her life, when her physical capacity to carry out certain formal functions had become limited. What makes the decree issued on the 9th of April, 2026, different from those historical precedents is not its constitutional basis. That basis is well established and legally sound. What makes it different is what it actually says, and specifically who it names as the primary recipient of the authority it transfers. The people inside the palace who were briefed on the content of the decree in those early morning hours reacted with a level of surprise that tells you something important about how significant its provisions actually are. Because the decree did not simply activate the standard framework for managing a monarch's temporary incapacity, it went considerably further than that. It named specific powers. It defined specific domains of royal authority. and it directed those powers and that authority toward a specific individual whose receipt of them represents something that has no clear precedent in the modern history of the institution. That individual was not William, it was Catherine. Now, understand why that fact stopped people in their tracks. The standard assumption in any scenario involving the temporary incapacity of a reigning monarch is that the powers requiring delegation flow immediately and naturally to the heir, to the person who is constitutionally next in line, to the individual whose entire existence within the institution is defined by their proximity to the throne and their preparation to occupy it. William is that person. He has always been that person. And in the hours following Charles's emergency admission, the assumption among senior figures within the palace was that whatever formal transfer of authority followed would be directed primarily toward him. The decree said otherwise, and the reasons why it said otherwise. The specific thinking behind the decision to name Catherine rather than William as the primary recipient of the transferred authority tell you something profound about the internal dynamics of this monarchy and about the specific role that Catherine has come to occupy within it. Those reasons are more deliberate and more consequential than anything the palace has yet been willing to say publicly. And they start with understanding exactly what the decree actually contains. The emergency decree. The emergency decree issued on the 9th of April, 2026 is 4 pages long. It is written in the precise and formal language of constitutional documentation, the kind of language that has been refined over centuries of British legal practice to say exactly what it means, and nothing beyond that. There is no room in a document of this kind for ambiguity or for the diplomatic softening that characterizes most royal communications. Every word carries legal weight. Every clause has a specific and defined consequence, and the consequences defined in this particular document are extraordinary. The decree operates under the authority of the Regency Act of 1937, the constitutional framework that governs the transfer of royal functions in situations where the sovereign is incapacitated. Under that framework, when a monarch is unable to carry out specific royal duties, those duties can be formally delegated to a designated individual or group of individuals through a legally binding instrument signed by the sovereign or by authorized representatives of the sovereign acting under specific conditions. What makes the 9th of April decree unusual is the scope of what it delegates and to whom it delegates it. The document identifies 3 categories of royal function that are being transferred for the duration of the king's incapacitation. The first category covers the formal executive functions of the monarchy, the signing of state documents, the formal reception of ambassadors and heads of state, the authorization of orders in council and other instruments of royal prerogative that require the sovereign's personal involvement to be legally valid. The second category covers the institutional management functions of the crown, decisions about the royal household, authorization of expenditure from the sovereign grant, oversight of the formal processes by which the monarchy manages its relationship with government and with the broader constitutional apparatus of the British state. The third category is the one that has generated the most discussion among the constitutional experts and royal commentators who have been briefed on the decree's contents. It covers what the document describes as the representational and symbolic functions of the sovereign, the public engagements, the ceremonial appearances, the formal occasions at which the presence of a senior royal figure carries constitutional as well as ceremonial significance. All 3 categories have been delegated to Catherine, not to a council, not to a group of senior royals acting collectively in the way that the Regency Act allows for, to one person, specifically and by name. Catherine Elizabeth, Princess of Wales, is named in the decree as the sole primary delegate of the transferred royal functions for the duration of King Charles's incapacitation. The constitutional basis for this is sound. The Regency Act permits exactly this kind of specific and individual delegation under the conditions that apply here, but the fact that it is permitted does not make it unremarkable, because the choice to delegate these functions to Catherine rather than to William, or to a combination of senior royals including William, is a choice that carries enormous significance beyond its legal mechanics. It is a statement about trust, about capability, and about the specific role that Catherine has come to occupy in the thinking of those at the very center of this institution. Royal constitutional expert Professor Robert Hazel of University College London noted in a commentary published on the afternoon of the 9th of April that the decree represented one of the most significant formal expansions of authority given to a Princess of Wales in the recorded history of the British monarchy. He observed that while the Regency Act provided the legal framework for such a delegation, the political and institutional decision to use that framework in this specific way reflected a judgment about Catherine's readiness and capability that went well beyond routine constitutional mechanics. That judgment had not been made casually or quickly. The evidence strongly suggests that the decree, or something very close to it, had been prepared in advance. That the scenario of Charles's incapacitation had been planned for with sufficient thoroughness that when the emergency arrived in the early hours of the 9th of April, the document was ready to be activated rather than drafted from scratch. Someone had been preparing for this moment for a long time, and the person at the center of that preparation was not surprised when it arrived. Catherine steps into unprecedented territory. Catherine received formal notification of the decree at 7:40 in the morning. She was at Kensington Palace when the call came through from the King's private secretary. The children had already left for school. William was with her. And the notification, when it arrived, was not a surprise in the way that genuinely unexpected things are surprising. It was the arrival of something that had been prepared for, something that had been discussed and planned and quietly rehearsed in the way that serious people prepare for serious possibilities. She read the decree in full, twice, and then she began to work. The first thing Catherine did after receiving formal notification was convene a meeting with her own senior aides at Kensington Palace. The meeting began at 8:15 in the morning and lasted approximately 50 minutes. What came out of it was an immediate action plan for the first 48 hours of her expanded authority, a structured and specific document that covered which functions required immediate attention, which could be managed through existing processes, and which required her direct and personal involvement from the outset. The plan had clearly been prepared in advance. Sources present at the 8:15 meeting describe Catherine's demeanor as one of complete and focused calm. There was no visible anxiety, no sense of a person being overwhelmed by the weight of what had just been placed on her shoulders. What people in that room observed was a woman who had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of moment, moving into it with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the territory completely. Her first formal act under the authority of the decree came at 10:30 in the morning. She signed a state document that had been awaiting the sovereign's authorization, a routine instrument of royal prerogative that under normal circumstances would have carried Charles's signature. On the 9th of April, 2026, it carried Catherine's, and that signature, ordinary in its mechanics and extraordinary in its significance, became the first formal exercise of delegated sovereign authority by a Princess of Wales in the modern history of the British monarchy. The people in the room, when she signed it, understood what they were witnessing. By midday, Catherine had received 2 foreign ambassadors who had been scheduled for formal audiences with the king. She received them in her capacity as the king's designated delegate. She conducted both audiences with the fluency and the diplomatic precision that years of royal engagement had developed in her. And she did something in both of those audiences that the ambassadors later described to their respective governments in terms that reflected genuine admiration. She made them feel that the institution they were engaging with was completely stable. That quality of projected stability is not accidental. It is one of the most demanding skills in royal life. The ability to represent an institution that is under genuine internal pressure in a way that communicates solidity and continuity to the outside world. It requires an absolute separation between what you know and feel internally and what you allow to be visible in a formal setting. Catherine demonstrated that separation on the 9th of April with a completeness that left no gap between the two. The afternoon brought the most visible exercise of her expanded authority. Catherine appeared publicly at an engagement that had originally been scheduled for Charles. She was introduced in terms that reflected her new status as the king's formal delegate. She delivered remarks that had been prepared for the occasion with a directness and a warmth that drew an immediate and positive public response. And she carried herself throughout with the bearing of a woman who was not standing in for someone else. She was standing in her own authority. The public reaction to her appearance was immediate and significant. Social media responses, commentary from royal watchers, the instinctive public reading of what they were seeing, all of it pointed in the same direction. This was not a placeholder. This was not a temporary arrangement designed to manage a difficult moment until things returned to normal. This was a woman exercising real power and doing it with a naturalness that made the unprecedented feel entirely appropriate. Camilla was watching all of it, and what she was feeling in those hours was something that no amount of preparation could have fully cushioned her against. William's position and the question of succession. William spent the morning of the 9th of April at his father's bedside. He arrived at the King Edward VII Hospital at 5:40 in the morning, less than 2 hours after Charles had been admitted. He stayed through the morning and into the early afternoon. The medical team briefed him directly and in detail about the king's condition, and what he heard in those briefings confirmed something that he had been privately preparing for with increasing urgency over the preceding months. His father's health had reached a point of genuine and serious fragility. The specific details of Charles's medical situation on the 9th of April have not been formally disclosed by the palace. What sources close to the royal household have confirmed is that the episode that triggered the emergency hospitalization was significantly more serious than the public statement released at 11:20 suggested. The king's condition in those first hours was sufficiently concerning that the medical team was not in a position to offer the kind of reassuring projections that would have made the palace's communications task considerably easier. William absorbed all of it, quietly and completely. People who have observed William in moments of genuine personal crisis consistently describe the same quality. A stillness that is not the absence of feeling, but the absolute prioritization of function over expression. He processes, he assesses, he identifies what needs to be done, and he does it without allowing the emotional weight of the situation to compromise his capacity to act effectively within it. He demonstrated that quality on the 9th of April with a consistency that people present found remarkable given the circumstances. What William did not do on that morning was contest the decree. That fact deserves attention, because the decree named Catherine, rather than William, as the primary recipient of the transferred royal authority. And a man of lesser security and lesser institutional understanding might have found that choice personally difficult, might have pushed back against it, might have used the channels available to him to raise questions about why the authority was flowing to his wife rather than directly to him as the heir. William did none of that. Sources close to his household confirm that his response to the decree was one of complete and immediate support. He understood why it had been structured the way it had been structured. He understood the specific thinking behind the decision to name Catherine as the primary delegate. And he understood that his own role in the situation was not diminished by that decision, but was in fact strengthened by it. Because the decree and the thinking behind it reflected something important about how William and Catherine operate as a unit. They do not compete for authority. They distribute it. They have built their partnership on the understanding that the most effective deployment of their combined capability sometimes means one of them carries the formal authority, while the other operates in a supporting but equally essential role. On the 9th of April, William was at the hospital. Catherine was at Kensington Palace exercising the authority of the decree. Those two deployments were not in tension with each other. They were complementary, two parts of a coordinated response to a crisis that their years of joint preparation had made them capable of managing simultaneously and effectively. But William's position in the broader successions question is where the situation becomes more complex. Charles's hospitalization on the 9th of April has accelerated conversations inside the palace about the timeline of succession that were already happening with increasing frequency, but that had not yet reached the point of formal institutional planning. The question of when William becomes king has always been present in the background of every significant decision the institution has made since Charles's cancer diagnosis in 2024. But it had been treated as a background question, something to be planned for in the abstract without a specific or pressing timeline attached to it. The 9th of April changed that. What happened to Charles on that morning made the succession question feel considerably less abstract than it had the day before. And the speed with which the emergency decree was activated suggested that certain people inside the institution had already been treating it as considerably less abstract for some time. The implications of that shift are profound, and they are already being felt in ways that will shape everything that comes next. Camilla's reaction and what she has lost. Camilla learned about the decree at 8:30 in the morning, not from William, not from the king's private secretary, not through any of the formal channels that the palace uses to communicate significant institutional decisions to senior members of the royal family. She learned about it from a member of her own household staff who had picked up the information through the back-channel network that operates within the palace and that carries news of consequential developments faster than any official process ever could. The way she learned about it was itself a statement. In a functioning and aligned royal household, a decision of this magnitude would have been communicated to the Queen Consort through formal channels and with sufficient advance notice to allow her to process it before it became operational. The fact that Camilla found out about the decree through unofficial sources rather than through any formal notification tells you something precise and important about where she stood in the thinking of the people who had drafted and activated it. She had not been consulted, she had not been informed in advance, and she had not been considered a necessary part of the process that produced one of the most significant transfers of royal authority in the modern history of the institution. That exclusion was not accidental. Camilla's initial reaction, according to sources close to her household, covered a range of emotions in rapid succession. The first was disbelief, not at Charles's hospitalization. She had known about his deteriorating condition with more specificity than the public statements had conveyed, and she had been managing her own private anxiety about his health for weeks. The disbelief was directed at the decree itself, at the specific and extraordinary fact that the authority being transferred in response to her husband's incapacitation was flowing not to her as Queen Consort, and not to William as heir, but to Catherine as Princess of Wales. She had not seen it coming. Not in this form, not with this speed, and not with this degree of deliberate and documented exclusion of her own household from the process. The disbelief gave way quickly to something harder. Sources describe Camilla, in the hours following her discovery of the decree, as operating in a state of barely contained fury that she was working extremely hard to keep from becoming visible to anyone outside her immediate circle. She was making calls. She was asking questions. She was trying to understand the full scope of what had been activated and what it meant for her own position within the institution going forward. What she discovered through those calls did nothing to reduce her fury. The decree was not a temporary administrative arrangement designed to manage a specific and limited set of royal functions during a brief period of the king's incapacitation. It was a comprehensive and formally documented transfer of authority that covered virtually every domain of royal function that required active management during Charles's hospitalization. And it named Catherine with a specificity and a completeness that left no meaningful role for Camilla's household in the management of any of those functions. She had been effectively sidelined, formally, legally, and in a way that was now a matter of documented constitutional record. The practical consequences of that sidelining were immediate and visible. The engagements that would normally have fallen to Camilla as Queen Consort during a period of the king's incapacitation were being redirected to Catherine. The formal communications flowing from the palace about the management of royal functions during the crisis period made no reference to any role for Camilla's household. And the staff within the broader palace structure, who would normally have maintained their regular lines of communication with the Queen Consort's office, were suddenly operating within a framework that had reoriented itself entirely toward Catherine's operation. Camilla could feel the institutional gravity shifting in real time, and she was powerless to redirect it. What she had lost in the hours following the decree went beyond the specific functions and engagements that had been formally transferred to Catherine. What she had lost was something more fundamental and more difficult to recover. She had lost the assumption of relevance. For 3.5 years since Charles became king in September of 2022, Camilla had operated within the institution on the basis of an assumption that her position as Queen Consort gave her a foundational and unchallengeable relevance to every significant decision and every significant moment in the life of the monarchy. That assumption had shaped everything about how her household operated, how it related to other households within the palace structure, how it managed its access to royal resources and royal processes, how it understood its own importance within the institution. The decree had dismantled that assumption in a single morning, and the people inside the palace who had watched Camilla's household operate on the basis of that assumption for 3.5 years were now recalibrating their understanding of where the real authority within the institution actually resided. That recalibration was happening quickly, and it was happening visibly. The subtle but unmistakable ways in which people inside an institution reorganized themselves around new centers of power were already in motion within hours of the decree becoming known. Royal commentator and biographer Angela Levin noted in a background briefing in the days following the 9th of April that Camilla's position within the institution had been more contingent than it appeared for some time. She observed that the decree had made visible something that had been true in practice for considerably longer than the official narrative around the monarchy had acknowledged. The center of gravity within the institution had already moved toward William and Catherine. The decree had simply formalized that reality in a way that could no longer be managed or reframed or diplomatically softened. For Camilla, the question of what came next was not a comfortable one. The institutional structures that had supported her position were being reorganized around someone else. The access and the authority and the assumed relevance that had defined her role as queen consort were being redistributed with a thoroughness that left very little for her household to hold on to. And the person doing the redistributing was not acting hastily or emotionally. She was acting from a position of formal constitutional authority, calmly, deliberately, and with the full weight of a signed decree behind every decision she made. That was the reality Camilla was facing on the 9th of April, 2026, and it was a reality that was not going to become more comfortable with time. What this means for the future of the crown. The 9th of April 2026 will be remembered as a turning point, not simply because of what happened to King Charles on that morning, not simply because of the emergency decree that followed or the unprecedented transfer of authority it contained, but because of what that combination of events revealed about the true state of the British monarchy and the direction in which it is now moving, with a speed and a clarity that leaves very little room for alternative interpretation. The institution is in transition, real, substantive, irreversible transition, and the events of the 9th of April have compressed the timeline of that transition in ways that are going to shape everything about what the British monarchy looks like for the next generation. The King's hospitalization on the 9th of April was not an isolated medical event that can be managed and resolved and then set aside as the institution returns to its previous operating rhythm. It was the most visible and most serious manifestation of a health situation that has been deteriorating with increasing consistency since his cancer diagnosis in February of 2024. The people closest to Charles understand this. The medical team managing his care understands this. And the institutional actors who drafted and activated the emergency decree on the morning of the 9th of April understood it with sufficient clarity to produce a document that went considerably further than a simple temporary administrative arrangement. The decree was not written for a short-term crisis. It was written for a prolonged one. The scope of the authority it transferred to Catherine, the comprehensiveness of the domains it covered, the specificity with which it named her as the primary delegate, rather than constructing a collective arrangement that would have been easier to wind back when the immediate crisis passed. All of these features of the document point to the thinking of people who were planning for a scenario that extended well beyond the King's current hospitalization. They were planning for the possibility that the King's capacity to carry out his functions might not fully return to its previous level. And they were building a framework that could accommodate that possibility without requiring a formal abdication or a public declaration of incapacity that would have generated a constitutional and media crisis of its own. The decree is that framework, and Catherine is its center. What that means for the future of the crown is both profound and in many ways already decided. Catherine is now exercising royal authority at a level that has no precedent for a Princess of Wales in the modern era. She is signing state documents. She is receiving foreign dignitaries. She is managing the formal institutional functions of the monarchy with a completeness and a capability that is generating something inside the institution that is more valuable than any formal title or constitutional instrument. She is generating trust, and not just from the people inside the palace who are working with her in this expanded capacity, not just from the constitutional actors and government officials who are interacting with her as the King's formal delegate, but from the public. From the country that is watching her navigate an extraordinary situation with a grace and a steadiness that communicates something fundamental about who she is and what she is capable of. Public confidence in the monarchy, which had been tested by the accumulated pressures of the preceding years, has responded to Catherine's visible exercise of authority with something that royal analysts have described as a measurable and significant uptick. People are watching a woman handle real responsibility in a moment of genuine institutional pressure, and what they are seeing is reassuring them about the future of an institution that they had begun to have genuine questions about. That public response matters enormously, because the monarchy's ultimate source of authority is not constitutional, it is not legal, it is not historical. It is the ongoing consent and confidence of the people it serves. And Catherine, in the days since the 9th of April, has done more to consolidate that consent and confidence than any formal ceremony or official announcement could have achieved. For William, the events of the 9th of April have clarified his own position in ways that are equally significant. He is not simply the heir to the throne waiting for the moment of succession. He is the co-architect of a transition that is already underway. The partnership between him and Catherine that has been building for 15 years is now operating at the institutional level with the full weight of formal authority behind it. And the combination of his own expanding role within the monarchy and Catherine's exercise of the delegated authority represents something that the institution has not seen in living memory. A future king and queen who are already functioning as the effective center of the monarchy's operational reality before the formal transfer of the crown has taken place. That reality has implications for the succession timeline that the palace is going to need to address with increasing directness in the coming months. The question of when Charles's reign formally ends and William's formally begins is no longer purely a medical question or a personal one. It is an institutional question, and the events of the 9th of April have made it a more urgent institutional question than it has ever previously been. For Camilla, the future that the 9th of April has revealed is the one she has been working hardest to avoid. A future in which her position within the institution is defined entirely by its relationship to the past rather than to the present. In which her access and her authority and her assumed relevance are the residue of a reign that is ending rather than the foundation of a role that is continuing. In which the institutional gravity has moved so completely toward William and Catherine that her household exists in the margins of the monarchy's operational reality rather than at its center. That future is not a distant possibility. It is already the present. The decree of the 9th of April has made it formal, has given it constitutional documentation, has ensured that the transfer of authority it represents cannot be quietly reversed or renegotiated when the immediate crisis passes. What has been established in that document is a new baseline for how the monarchy functions, and that baseline does not include a significant operational role for Camilla's household. The broader institutional implications of the 9th of April extend beyond any individual member of the family. What the decree and the events surrounding it have demonstrated is that the British monarchy has the capacity to manage a profound internal transition without the kind of public rupture that its critics have always predicted would accompany any serious challenge to its stability. The institution has absorbed the pressure of Charles's deteriorating health, the contested dynamics between its competing households, and the urgent question of succession without losing the public confidence that is its ultimate foundation. It has done that because of the quality of the people now at its center. William and Catherine have not just prepared for this moment. They have demonstrated in real time, under genuine pressure, with real authority and real consequences attached to their decisions, that they are capable of carrying the weight of the crown with the seriousness and the integrity it demands. The decree of the 9th of April handed Catherine unprecedented royal power. But power is only as significant as the person exercising it makes it. And Catherine has made it very significant indeed. The future of the British crown is not uncertain. It is not fragile. It is not dependent on outcomes that are yet to be determined. It is already here, already functioning, already demonstrating the standard it intends to maintain. And it is built on a foundation that the events of the 9th of April have made stronger than it has been in years. King Charles's hospitalization triggered an emergency decree that changed the monarchy in a single afternoon. Catherine has stepped into unprecedented territory with a calm and a capability that has left the royal world completely reassured. The transition is no longer coming. It is already here.